Senator Ortman, this is just a news conference to call on her to do, so you can't compel her to file a lawsuit, correct?
We are looking at all of our options.
But as of now, you guys were defeated in the House and in the Senate with these amendments, so as of now, if this doesn't become a law in the statute, you can't compel her to do that because she's a separate constitutionally elected officer.
I am not going to agree with that at this point. We could act legislatively. At this point, the House and the Senate have not acted legislatively. That is one way in which she can be enlisted to file a lawsuit on our behalf. But there are other ways, including Minnesota statutes.
We did have the amendment yesterday, Tom, and we can file separate legislation for this, and if they refuse to give us a hearing, we can try to drag the bill to the floor. But we are not done trying to get this done by whatever means possible.
Will you explain what that is?
Our amendment yesterday essentially was to instruct the Attorney General by statute to file the lawsuit in federal court and to fight on behalf of the people of Minnesota under the 10th Amendment. And this is not unprecedented for us to, for people to push back on federal legislation and for courts to strike it down. If you go back to the 1930s, parts of the New Deal were struck down on a regular basis by the U.S. Supreme Court. So this is not unprecedented for people to come forward and say that the Congress is acting beyond its constitutional boundaries. So we failed in our attempt on the amendment on the floor, but that doesn't mean we aren't going to try to put in legislation and enforce that through. Now, we don't have the votes just as Republicans, so we're hoping the Democrats will wake up and recognize that the Constitution is what we are swearing to uphold on day one when we're sworn in. It's not about swearing to a political party or to a president, it's about swearing up to the Constitution.
But are there any other options to compel the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, besides the statute, to say you need to file this lawsuit? So on May 18th, it's unlikely Democrats are going to pass this. So on May 18th, is there anything else that you can do to compel her to do that?
There may be other options for all of us, and that's what we're doing now, is exploring all the options about whether we can join with or without her, whether we can insist that she file. There is, as I said, Minnesota Statutes 8.1 has a mandate that if the state's interests are directly affected in a lawsuit in federal court, she must appear. And that's what we're looking at now, is what are our options. So that's why we're saying to her, please come forward and state your position so then we can act accordingly.
So, Armin, she has handed out campaign literature calling for universal health care and calling people to support Obama's plan. And she's a Democrat. Do you have any, are you acknowledging that you have to find a legal way to make her do this, that you don't expect her to do it?
Well, again, I would say that her political agenda has gotten in the way of her responsibilities to serve the residents of the state and the state of Minnesota. And it is of great concern to Minnesotans because she is our attorney. She was hired to be our attorney, and once in that office, she really had a responsibility to be acting in a nonpartisan fashion.
Is the 10th Amendment part, if this is successful going to court, would it affect only that one part that you're concerned about, the commerce, or would it repeal the entire bill? Would it declare the entire bill unconstitutional?
That depends upon the severability question, which the courts will look at again to determine whether Congress's intent was to make it severable or not. Meaning, the court will look to decide whether, if you strike down the one unconstitutional provision, if the entire scheme fails, or whether the remainder continues with the force of law. That's a terrible result for us as well. If all of the mandates and the benefits continue, but the sources of revenue are struck down by the court, that could create chaos. We don't want that either. So we will be arguing very, very strenuously for the non-severability.
So your goal is to get rid of the entire bill?
Yes.
And not just that one part of it?
Yes. And I would just follow up on what Representative Seifert said. The U.S. Supreme Court has more recently taken a more limited approach to the Congress's power under the Commerce Clause. There were two recent cases that you might be interested in where Congress attempted to regulate non-economic activity, and the Supreme Court said that Congress encroached upon the 10th Amendment rights of the states to regulate those activities. In particular was the ban on guns on school premises and the Violence Against Women Act. The Supreme Court held them to be unconstitutional provisions in congressional legislation. So that's part of the precedent that we have going forward. We expect that the Supreme Court, if they're given a chance to to opine here will say that there is a limitation to the commerce power. It's been overreached here, and the state's rights to regulate this area continue.
Well, then cherry picking some of the stuff, do you oppose the pre-existing condition and the age 26 of kids and the denial of coverage?
Pat,
Do you
I'm glad
oppose
you
putting
asked
that in
that.
the law?
So glad you asked that. There may be very legitimate policy goals in this legislation. That's not the point. There is a constitutional method available for responding to those and addressing those policy concerns and accomplishing the goals. But what the Supreme Court will look to is to say, have they done it in a way that has offended the Constitution? And in this case, yes. Was there, and the Supreme Court will ask this, with their scrutiny, they will say, were there other means available that were constitutional to accomplish these goals? And we are all here to say, yes, it would be the more straightforward, raise the income tax or tax credit. So what they're doing really is taking it away from what has been the traditional way to provide for the general welfare of the residents of the United States and adopted this really contorted scheme to avoid that.
Is there a political need for Minnesota?
Can I add to that real quick, Pat? I would also add, the federal government's got no business doing this. And the reality is, we can take care of this here in the state of Minnesota. We don't need the federal government advancing these policies, which frankly, there is no basis in the Constitution for them to do in the first place. And rather than getting down into the weeds about the legalities, I think the average person on the street wants to know, what are you going to do about these issues? You're talking about guarantee issue. These are things that can be handled at a state level. And frankly, there have been proposals all along to do that. I've got one of my colleagues back here that says, we can start over. Well, it's really not starting over. And I think the comment more is about going back to what we have proposed here at a state level, how to take care of our business in the state of Minnesota. What the federal government is trying to do is they're going to pass a law, frankly, that violates the Constitution, trying to solve problems that should be solved here at the state level. And I think Senator Ortman has correctly identified that at a Supreme Court level, there's already precedent to tell the federal government this is an encroachment on states' rights. It can be handled here.
Do you oppose pre-existing condition, age 26, no denial of coverage, no lifetime limits?
No, I don't think that you can come to that conclusion. Matter of fact, Representative Steve Govalt has authored a bill, I've co-authored it, that deals with pre-existing conditions here in the state of Minnesota. Only it's a different method of how you deal with it. It uses, again, the private sector, and in pre-existing conditions, we use that little extra risk and use the state's help to cover the extra risk that comes with pre-existing conditions, but it fundamentally goes first to the private component. So we already have solutions. We have good solutions. They save money. They reduce the bureaucracy. And I think we've already proven that. We have those ideas. If you care to look at that, I can tell you about other bills as well.